Let's talk a little bit about ADHD meds and whether or not they're worth it. I want to lay out all of my talking points before I get into all of them, just so you can know what you're getting yourself into. So I'm going to start off with talking about how my life was before ADHD meds and after. And then I'm going to be talking about the side effects of ADHD medication. I'm going to be talking about what specific ADHD meds that I've taken and what has worked for me and what method of taking the ADHD meds has worked for me. I'm also going to be talking about how ADHD meds has affected my autism. And then I'm going to be talking about how ADHD meds have affected my monotropism. And then I'm going to go into how ADHD medication affects my eating as well. All of this to say, I am not a medical professional. I am not a psychiatrist. This is not intended to be advice for you guys. Whenever you're talking about medication, especially a controlled substance like ADHD meds, you should always be advising with your psychiatrist. I just thought that it would be helpful for me to come on here and talk about my personal experiences with ADHD meds, just so you have something to work off of. Get a little bit of information in my experience here, get a little bit of other people's information and experiences in other places. Either way, I think being able to have more resources than just one person to go off of when you're making your decisions is the best way to go. So with that being said, grab your coffee, grab your water, grab your matcha, get yourself settled in and situated, and let's get into it. Shake it up. I swear, every time I drink this, it's so refreshing. What I love about Magic Mind's matcha is that not only are the ingredients really high quality, but it also contains a lot of nootropics, adaptogens, and antioxidants that help support and boost your immunity on top of it. I have sensory issues, so I have a really difficult time swallowing a lot of vitamins and supplements every single day, so it really does help that I'm getting all of those nutritional needs met somewhere, somehow. And for me, taking this shot first thing in the morning before I get started in my day, ADHD meds is honestly sometimes a punch into gear, whereas this kind of kickstarts your focus in a more gentle way. So within this one little shot, you get lion's mane, cordyceps mushrooms, ashwagandha, L-theanine, turmeric, vitamin C and D3, B2, B3, B12 vitamins, organic matcha green tea, which is ceremonial grade, organic olive oil, organic agave, passion fruit, organic ashwagandha. It helps with your cognition. It helps with sustaining even energy throughout the day without that crash that coffee oftentimes gives you. If you're in the market to find a new matcha drink for yourself, you could actually use my code ThoughtTrial to get yourself a 3 sample pack for free. This is such a good deal, you guys. You're honestly losing nothing. You get to try this drink for free. If you really like it, great. If you don't like it, then you're not losing much. Just go click the link in the description box below. But anyways, I have Magic Mind pumping through my veins now. I have my focus. Take a deep breath with me and let's get back to today's video. All right, so what was my life like before ADHD medication? It's so hard to summarize this in a thesis statement, but I'm going to try my best. For context, I was diagnosed and medicated for my ADHD during COVID lockdown, and I believe I was 23 years old or so, give or take. Before getting diagnosed and medicated for my ADHD, my life was so difficult to maintain, and on the surface, it looked like I was functional, right? Because I could do enough to be able to go to class, pass my classes, go to work, and things like that. But what people don't understand is underneath the surface of what looks like a functioning human being is a lot of struggle to maintain that bare minimum, in combination with cycles of crashing and burnout that was so crazily intense and not normal, right? The types of burnout that I'm talking about is, let's say, at least 3 months of being unable to balance life outside of waking up, feeding myself, and showering. Other than that, I was genuinely rotting in my bed every single day for 3 months straight before I could get enough energy to pick myself back up and move on with my life. And I oftentimes talk about this concept on my channel. Just because you're able to do something doesn't mean you're actually able to do it. Oftentimes when you are, let's say, a level 1 autistic, or you have really, really bad ADHD, It's not as simple as I'm able to do A, B, C, so therefore my neurodivergence isn't as disabling. It's more so about I can't afford to not do these things. And because I have to force myself to do it, when in reality I can't do it, at what cost is this causing me? In reality, going to school every single day and having a part-time job is not something that I could do. But because I had no other choice, I was facing really bad crippling depression and anxiety. My OCD tendencies were really bad during the years of college that I had to be a full-time student and have a part-time job. I struggled a lot with panic attacks during those 4 years, and I had really bad GI issues as well on top of it. That's not how a human should live. It was almost like I was on emergency mode every single day for 4 years. Yeah, maybe I could still make it to class. Yeah, maybe I could still show up to my work on weekends, but it came at a cost to my mental and physical health. And that's not how maintaining the bare minimum of life should be. You know what I'm saying? There's other people out there that can more or less maintain that without risking their own health. One of the reasons why it was so difficult for me to maintain the bare minimum of life before ADHD meds is because my ADHD affects me in a way where it's really difficult to focus or do something unless I'm full-heartedly interested in it. Oftentimes people think ADHD just means you have a lack of focus and you kind of have to do all of these different things to maintain interest, when there's a lot of different ways that ADHD presents for various types of people. For me, I tended to have an inattentive type of ADHD. So if I'm not completely interested in something, which was because of our society, a lot of things I had to do, I would find myself escaping to my imagination or fantasizing about all these different types of worlds and scenarios in order to get me through the day, which, as you can imagine, is not necessarily helpful when you are becoming an adult that has to more and more become independent, maintain a lot more responsibility, and all of that stuff. It makes your childhood really enriching and fun, but as you become an adult, it's not the same story. And so, as you can imagine, when you have to force yourself to ignore things that actually interest you while simultaneously force yourself to do things that don't interest you, it sucks up a lot of energy and also life force energy on top of it, like your will to exist and do things, which makes doing things harder than it already is. You can start to see how that all starts to play into each other, right? And I feel like because of how our society is set up, I never have a chance to fully immerse myself into something that I'm actually interested in, which is something that comes naturally to me and would be really easy for me to do, but that's just not how life works, you know? Unless you find loopholes. That begins to affect how you view yourself when it's hard for you to maintain the bare minimum and at times even impossible because you think you're less capable, when in reality, you're just in a society that doesn't allow you to tap into your flow state as much as you would want to and need to, and access your natural, unique capabilities that would be really difficult for other people to be able to access. Other people who are neurotypical or non-ADHD, non-autistic, and things like that. So after getting medicated for my ADHD, I felt like life was completely different. Before, it was even impossible for me to wake up in the morning because I had essentially classically trained myself to dread mornings and become really dysregulated as soon as I woke up. My anxiety at that point was really, really bad as a starting baseline. This is something that I talked about with my psychiatrist. My anxiety wasn't a mental anxiety. It was very physical. So I would wake up and I immediately would feel my heart racing, my palms getting sweaty. Mentally, I could be okay, right? And even then, it's a little bit gray. So when I say that my anxiety is more physical, I'm not saying I never experienced mental anxiety. What I'm saying is that my anxiety is always physical, and there's times where the mental aspect of myself will also catch up to the physical anxiety, and there's other times where the mental anxiety isn't there and it's just physical. But either way, it's always a physical response to anxiety, which I guess is just essentially physical dysregulation. And an indication to me that my anxiety was more physical, there would be moments where I would be at a doctor's appointment, and as they're taking my vitals, they'll be super surprised at what my heart rate is and what my blood pressure was. And they would ask me, like, are you okay? Are you anxious right now? And things like that. And genuinely, I would be like, oh, I'm completely fine. I'm super calm. But it wasn't reflecting in the numbers, right? Have that happen again and again and consistently, that kind of told me I could be mentally okay and calm, but my body is just so extremely dysregulated all the time. And so when I started taking my ADHD meds, I was able to have a lot more focus, and I didn't need to use up so much emotional energy and energy from other areas of existing in order to just get simple tasks done. I could just simply get tasks done, right? So in the beginning of me taking my meds, I would wake up with that sense of dread. Immediately, I would want to go back to sleep and soothe myself in order to escape that extreme dysregulation. I would keep the ADHD meds next to my bed in my nightstand because it was that bad. Like, getting out of bed was that difficult for me. And so I would wake up, immediately take my meds, and within 15 to 30 minutes as the medication was kicking in, no anxiety anymore. My brain would just start working. The way that I like to explain it is that all the thoughts before medication is happening all at once. And it's really hard to put them in order, let alone begin to plan out how to get them done in order, or how to do the first thing without thinking about the 5 other things that you have planned out. With the medication, all of a sudden, it becomes simple. You have an idea of what you have to do, and you don't even have to think about the stuff outside of the immediate thing you have to do because you know that you'll remember it. I feel like without the medication, you're constantly needing to remind yourself of everything because you're almost like inherently scared you're gonna forget. So you're constantly like, I need to brush my teeth. But also afterwards, I have to go cook food, eat breakfast, feed the dog, and then walk the dogs while you're just simply brushing your teeth. And then you start to get really, really anxious, right? But with the medication, it's just like you have an idea of all those things. Oh, I have to brush teeth, I have to eat breakfast, I have to walk the dogs. But because you remember it well, you could just go brush your teeth and focus on brushing your teeth. After you're done, you automatically move on to the next thing because you didn't forget about it, and then so on and so forth. So being able to just get through those simple things throughout your day without that dysregulation and panic made a huge difference. It helped conserve my energy so that I could use it for other things that actually would take up that much energy. So working and being able to plan out how to make my videos and how to execute them and things like that, versus using that energy immediately at the beginning of my day for very simple tasks that shouldn't need to use that energy. The day-to-day became a lot more manageable, and I wasn't completely exhausted at the end of the day. It's just, it was like a reasonable amount of expenditure versus getting things done. And you begin to build more trust in yourself. You begin to have a better idea of what you can accomplish and what you can't, because you're more stable every single day in terms of how you delegate your energy. Before the meds, I had no way of building goals for myself because I don't even know what energy I would be working off of the next day, let alone the end of the week or the end of the month or at the end of a few months. I could say I'm ready to see a friend on Monday, but come Friday, I would be completely shut down and burnt out to a point where I cannot fathom having a conversation or socializing, let alone leaving my house.
I want to hang out on Friday. My first thought is like, I don't know where I'm going to be at mentally on Friday. I want to hang out on Friday right now, but it's Tuesday. You know what I mean? Like, what if Friday comes and I don't even want to hang out with myself? Like, want to get dinner on Friday? I don't know. Kind of, but also, who knows? I might be sleeping from 4 to 9 p.m.
With the medication, you'll have a better idea of, if I make plans to see a friend on Monday, I will most likely be able to still see that friend at the end of the week. And if I set a goal for myself to be able to post 5 videos a month, I will most likely be able to see that through. Overall, as that goes on, day by day, week by week, month by month, you begin to just be able to kind of like breathe a little bit more. All right, so some of the side effects that I have in taking ADHD meds. This is something that I hear oftentimes people talking on and off about. It's pretty controversial, I would say, because there's a lot of people who vehemently, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, vehemently, let me see, because it's going to bother me if I am not pronouncing it right.
Vehemently.
There's a lot of people out there that vehemently detest ADHD meds. They don't think it's good for your body, especially long term, things like that. And then there's other people that are arguing that it's completely necessary for those of us with ADHD to be on the medication, even if it's not necessarily the best for us. It allows us to actually cope with life and get through, which ultimately has long-term health benefits because you're not pushing yourself to the absolute brink of destruction just to maintain life. So these are give and takes, right? And ultimately, you are the decider of what's best for you. All I know is that the chronic dysregulation and stress that I was going through before the medication was something that I am still dealing with the consequences of, with my chronic pain and all of my chronic health issues. And that's not something I believe that I could have kept doing for another 10, 20, 30 years. And so even though I take my ADHD meds and there are side effects to it, I feel like ultimately how much my ADHD meds do help me is enough of a payoff for me to deal with those side effects. But let me get into what those side effects are for me, while also reminding you guys that this is not going to be the case for every single person. Every single person is going to have a different response to medication. Some people might have psychosis because of ADHD meds. Some people might have absolutely no side effects, and some people are going to be somewhere in the middle. You don't want to do physical activity right when your medication kicks in because it's already going to raise your heart rate. If you're running, for example, it's going to raise your heart rate even more. And that's not good for you. So what's worked for me is when my ADHD meds kick in and my heart rate starts to go up, I actually have to go and kind of center myself a little bit just to kind of regulate my body a little bit more. So I'll go and stretch or I'll go and do breath work. That way my body could kind of get to a better baseline to match my focus in my brain, if that makes sense. I say this because a lot of the times people say that ADHD meds make them anxious. I want you guys to kind of pay attention to what that means. Sometimes people mistake physical dysregulation for anxiety. It's a little bit more difficult when you're neurodivergent to be able to tell the difference, and there is a difference, right? Another side effect of the ADHD meds is it's going to affect your appetite. You're probably not going to want to eat when you're on the medication, and that's not going to be the same for everyone. My partner who has ADHD is completely unaffected by the medication. He could eat the same amount on meds as he can off meds. For me, it's not like that. Like once I'm on the medication, I don't really feel the need to eat until the end of the workday. Another side effect of my ADHD meds is once it kicks in, I have to have a bowel movement. I don't know if this affects everyone like that, but my Adderall it makes me have to go take a number 2 immediately, which I think is a good thing because it's good to have bowel movements every day. I don't think it's unhealthy because as someone who's had IBS and GI issues, I know what it's like to be pooping an unhealthy amount. I'm sorry if this is TMI, but I'm just trying to be honest here. The first thing to consider when it comes to side effects is to consider that there's different types of ADHD meds or medication to help with your ADHD, different dosages and different ways of taking it. So this is why it's important to have a psychiatrist that you're working closely with on finding the right meds, the right way of taking it, and all of that kind of stuff. When I first started off with ADHD meds, I spent the first at least 6 months experimenting with different types of medication, dosages, and ways of taking it to ultimately land on what my medication is now and my routine with that medication. I remember taking extended release Adderall. It started off with 5 milligrams. And then as we would reconvene and realize that it didn't give me as much focus as I would want, we would bump it up to 10 milligrams, bump it up to 20, bump it up to 25. I think 25 is where we capped it off because I realized that taking 25 milligrams extended release Adderall actually lingered a lot longer than I needed it to. And I would have a hard time sleeping at the end of the day because of how much focus it gave me. Come around 11 p.m., I was still ready to keep working and doing things. I didn't feel mentally tired enough to want to go to sleep. On top of it, it affected your ability to feel hungry and eat as a result. I remember when I first took the 25 milligram extended release, I could go a whole day into the next day without eating and feel completely fine, and that's not healthy. And so my psychiatrist actually bumped down my dosage again to 20 and ultimately 10. But what I realized is that extended release didn't really work well for me, my neurology, and my lifestyle, because I noticed that the medication took a while to kick in. And when it did kick in, it was very, very subtle. And it was subtle throughout the whole day, but it lingered the whole day, if that makes sense. And I didn't really like that, because the way that my schedule looked is I needed that focus at the beginning of the day and at the middle of the day, and then for it to taper off completely in the evening, because I needed hours in the evening to wind down and get ready for sleep. And at the time I didn't know this, but I'm also autistic, so it makes a lot of sense that I needed a hard cutoff of that focus near the late afternoon, because I have a tendency to get way too focused, because that's just how my brain works. And even if the Adderall was tapering off, because it set me so on track and the inertia is so strong, it's almost like even if the med wasn't there, the sheer momentum of how my brain works just kept me going like a train. And so what we've come to realize is that what works best for me is to not take extended release and to focus more on using instant release Adderall. That has worked the best for me. And that's the medication I'm on right now. I take 10 milligrams in the morning. It gives me that focus immediately. It hits within 15 to 30 minutes. I'm able to just get into my day and get things going. And then come around 12 to 3 p.m., it begins to taper off pretty intensely. And that's when I could use that momentum to carry myself through the rest of the day. I take my 10 milligram instant release Adderall right before I eat my meal. And the reason why is because I notice if I eat food first and then take my medication, it doesn't work as well. Sometimes it doesn't even work at all. I don't know what the science is behind that, but my psychiatrist told me to take the medication before I take food. Another thing that I realized is that if I take my medication and wait too long to eat, I will lose my appetite completely and I'll skip breakfast and lunch, which is not good for my health. So the perfect way for me to take my medication is to take the 10 milligram Adderall and immediately eat my breakfast as it's kicking into my system, so that I'm still able to eat and feel hunger, but by the time the pill kicks in, breakfast would have been eaten and I'm ready to get my day started. I will say there are days where I do have to take multiple dosages of my ADHD meds, and those are the days where it's really, really hard for me to focus on things that don't immediately grab my attention. So this kind of goes back to the irregular distribution of focus rather than just a lack of focus, because I really want to drill it into your guys' brain that ADHD doesn't just mean that you have a lack of focus. Sometimes there's days where I wake up where I want to crochet for 8 hours and that's all I could think about and that's all I want to do, but that's not what I can afford to do. A lot of the times I have to wake up, do a certain amount of work that day, and then do other things that I'm interested in. And so on those types of days, I notice that when I take my 10 milligram in the morning, it tapers off within a few hours. Like by 10 a.m. or 11 a.m., I'm already getting distracted and thinking about crocheting. And that's when I know, okay, Irene, I need to take another Adderall to get me through the rest of the hours of work that I have to do. And that isn't all the time. Of course it differs. And I feel like especially when you're neurodivergent, we tend to work in seasons. So there's going to be seasons where all you can really focus on is work. So for example, when I'm in my work season, there's days where I don't even have to take Adderall to focus on work because that's all I'm thinking about already. That's the beauty of neurodivergence, is once you realize the seasons that you're in, you could use it to your advantage. Everyone's different, but what I've come to notice is that 10 to 30 milligrams is like a normal range for an average person. So on a day where focusing is really hard, I will take 10 milligrams in the morning, and then around 12 p.m. I'll take another 10 milligrams. And then I do notice on those days where I double up, it's really hard for me to fall asleep at the end of the night because the medications kind of combine together and then carries through the rest of the day. And it's really hard to slow down that momentum once it's kicked in. But normally I just take the 10 milligram in the morning, and it's enough to get me through my work day. And on days where I don't have work, I usually don't take my ADHD meds just because I have the ability to kind of just do what I want that day naturally and allow my attention to carry me through. But I will say on days where I don't have work and I have to get chores done or errands done that don't really interest me, I do have to take my medication on those types of days because it is a form of work, especially if you don't already want to do it, and so you kind of need a little bit more help. I want to quickly add that ADHD meds, if you're very cognizant of your habits, could be really helpful with healthy habit forming. So what that means is if you're consistent enough with the medication and building your routines for enough time, there will be days where even if you don't take the meds, the habits are so strong that you're still able to get them done with less executive dysfunction impacting you. So an example of that is I used to have a really, really hard time waking up and getting my day started because I had, again, classically trained myself to dread mornings. It was very common for me to not be able to get out of bed until late afternoon once I've already sabotaged my day, and then there was no pressure to get things done. And then that alleviation of pressure ironically allowed me to get up and get my day started. When I started the ADHD meds and taking them every single morning, it allowed me to get things done without that dread anymore. Eventually, after a certain amount of time of being consistent with the meds, I didn't wake up with dread anymore because I knew that it wouldn't feel as overwhelming as it used to. And then I eventually got to a point where even if there's a day where I woke up and didn't want to take my meds, I could still get up because I wasn't dealing with the dread, and I could still get things done because it was already a habit of me to get my day started, cook breakfast, do my morning routine. ADHD meds doesn't solve your issues. It just helps aid you in your efforts in developing healthier habits. It makes it more possible, achievable, doable. I don't want people to think that the medication is going to fix everything. Like you take your meds and all of a sudden you're like, why don't I just get these things done like everyone else? It's like, yeah, take your meds, but also you have to put in the effort as well. Meds should be a supplement to what you're already trying to do. It shouldn't be something that fixes everything automatically. Like you take your Adderall and all of a sudden you know how to play piano or you know how to cook your breakfast and things like that. Let's be a little bit realistic here, people. But all of this to say, I'm not consistent with taking my meds every single day and the same dosage every single day. Ideally, you'll build an understanding of yourself, your focus, and what you need help with, instead of robotically following like a schedule. But again, to each its own. Maybe someone works better off of that, but I tend to work better off of intuition and being able to study myself and what I'm going through. Therefore, what type of help do I need to get myself through what I need to get through. All right, so now let's talk about how my ADHD meds has affected my autism. And these two things go hand in hand for me, at least. I did not know I was autistic until I was diagnosed and medicated for my ADHD. And now sitting here, I'm diagnosed with both. I'm ADHD, but the reason why I don't think we would have ever known that I was autistic without the ADHD diagnosis and treatment is because my ADHD symptoms so severely masked my autistic symptoms, because ADHD symptoms a lot of the times seem so opposite from autism, like being more impulsive and making decisions last minute and the need for spontaneity, the need for changes. Like I could eat the same thing every single day for a month and then all of a sudden I can't look at the thing again and I need to move on to a next thing. I could have the same routine for a year and immediately need to switch it up and do something else. On top of that, I worked with autistic kids and autistic individuals for many, many years. So my idea of autism up until that point was very narrow, like everyone else. So I was mostly working with individuals who had level 3 autism, high support needs autism. I'm not a part of that population, and so I would have never considered myself autistic, right? But once I started getting medicated for my ADHD, I started to be able to manage my life a lot better. I started to notice that my inclination towards doing so many things was a lot more rigid than I had ever been able to see from myself throughout my life. Because before the meds, everyone in my life would kind of explain to you that Irene is just so spontaneous and all over the place and so random, and there's no order in her life, and it's really difficult for her to like maintain the same things for a long period of time. But after the medication, it's all of a sudden like I had to drink from the same cup every single day. I had to do the same things every day in the same ways. All of a sudden, I had to eat very specific types of food and in the same types of ways from the same types of bowls. And I had a really difficult time doing things outside of my routine and in ways outside of what I thought made the most sense to me. And I started having a lot more sensory issues on top of it. Weirdly enough, I also started to experience more social deficits and relationship difficulties when I started getting medicated for the ADHD, because I had a lot more monotropic thinking. I had more difficulties with transitions. I was getting lost in my special interests a lot more intensely, to the point where it was really difficult for me to do anything outside of what I wanted to do in that very moment. I had a harder time balancing things as well, not because I was unable to, but because I didn't want to. You know what I'm saying? With just the unmanaged ADHD, I was just a mess and didn't know how to balance multiple things. With the medicated ADHD, I started to realize I could do anything I want. It's just I only want to do these 5 things and see one person every 6 months or so. And that's not necessarily normal, right? Those are things that you would see in a stereotypical autistic person that isn't interested in socializing because they're really hyper-focused on a special interest and things like that. And it was really odd because none of it came from a place of dysregulation. That's the thing, is that I feel like my dysregulation led a lot of my existence before the medication, but after the meds, things were in order, both objectively and subjectively in an internal emotional way. I was a lot more regulated. I didn't really deal with as much shutdowns, meltdowns, burnouts. And so I was just so steady. And it made me realize that there's just something else there, And I think what helped me is I was living with my partner at the time, my now ex-partner, and he kind of helped reflect back to me that some of my patterns that he was seeing was not necessarily normal. And because I'm very introspective about things like that, I was doing a lot of research and realized that I aligned with a lot of the autistic symptoms. And that led me through the whole journey of going to get assessed and diagnosed with autism. But either way, I don't think I would have ever been able to see or experience any of my autistic traits without getting my ADHD symptoms treated and medicated. I feel like any of the autistic traits that came through would have just been kind of passed off as a quirk of mine. Monotropism is a person's tendency to focus their attention on a small number of interests at any time, tending to miss things outside of this attention tunnel. This cognitive strategy has been posited as the central underlying feature of autism. A tendency to focus attention tightly has a number of psychological implications. While monotropism tends to cause people to miss things outside their attention tunnel, within it, their focused attention can lend itself to intense experiences, deep thinking, and flow states. However, this hyperfocus makes it harder to redirect attention, including starting and stopping tasks, leading to what is often described as executive dysfunction in autism and stereotypes or perseveration, where a person's attention is repeatedly drawn back to the same subject or activity. It's so difficult for me once I'm focused on something and that's all I really want to think about and do, to be ripped away from it. When I was living with my ex-partner, when I had my headphones on and I was doing a task that I'm completely focused on, if he were to just walk up next to me or walk into the room and start talking casually about like, oh, I saw this bird today and it was really cool looking, blah, blah, blah. I would see him in the corner of my eye, like lingering, and then I'll look and I'll see his mouth moving. The act of needing to take my headphones off and then ask him to repeat himself in order to process what he's saying made me feel so irritable, to the point where I had to just tell him, when my headphones are on, I love you. I'm not trying to be an asshole, but do not talk to me, because I am in my tunnel. I am in my flow state, and talking to him or doing anything outside of what I'm doing is just so irking. Like, I hate it. It's just horrible. Like, I don't want to do it, you know? And it was really, really difficult for him to understand that, because he's not neurodivergent. At the time, he was just like, why should I have to think about when I'm allowed to talk to my own girlfriend? Like, it's not that big of a deal. I just wanted to come in and mention something. I didn't even really want to have a conversation. But that's the thing, is because of my monotropic thinking, I literally can't even focus on anything other than what I'm doing. Even if someone comes in and mentions one little sentence or statement, I can't process it. I don't want to process it. If I do have to, it will literally irritate me to no other end. Sometimes on a bad day, if I have to keep ripping my focus away to do other things, it can cause a literal autistic meltdown because it dysregulates me that much. Other ways that my monotropism presents itself in my life is, again, going back to the seasons. So what I've noticed is that I go through at least 4 seasons in my life throughout the year where everything within the season has to make sense within the context of what exists in it. The habits, the objective amount of work and the type of work I have to do, the type of socializing I have to do, it all has to flow together and make sense to each other. And that way I could completely focus in on that specific season of my life, and it's all encompassing. And once I'm out of that season, I have to move on to the next season where it's completely different and everything makes sense within that season as well. So for example, one season that I could be in is a really work-focused season where all I could think about and do is work-related things. I'm super inspired. I'm just constantly wanting to work, create, do new things. Within that season, I don't socialize because I can't think about anything or anyone else outside of work. I can't think too much even about my relationship during that time because that takes me away from work. I don't really want to go out and do new things and explore because I just want to hunker down and create the things in my small little office. And so the most that I could do is work and maybe even some routines that has to do with my body and health. Maybe I can maintain that, but sometimes I get so focused on work that I even neglect that, to be honest. Another season is like, I can't focus on work at all, not even to save my life. I wake up and I'm like, work is the last thing I want to do. I can't even look at my computer or my office. I just want to crochet for 8 hours. I just want to cook food at the beginning of the day and just chill out on my couch for the rest of the day watching all of my comfort shows. Those are kind of like what I consider the season of winter, just hibernating and recouping and resting. Another season that I go through is something that's more explorative. I imagine like springtime. I don't really care about work either during this time. I just more so think about what I'm going through personally and how much growth I want to have, how much expansion I want to experience. During this time, I may want to socialize more. I may want to meet new people, try new things out, like hobbies. I want to travel. I want to do all these things and experience life and kind of just ingest all this information so that introspection within myself can kind of start to rile up and I want to digest all of it. It's just a lot of energy, but it's more so about myself rather than work, if that makes sense. So one is more internal work, the other one's more external work. I also have come to notice that the ADHD meds has affected my inattentiveness. So before I was medicated, I had a really intense tendency to daydream a lot. And I've heard about maladaptive daydreaming, and I honestly think I had an issue with that because no matter where I was, no matter if it was work, school, or anything else, no matter what my age was, I was maladaptive daydreaming even at the age of like 22. You know what I'm saying? It's just like constantly needed to daydream about all these different types of things in order to get myself through through the day or through the task. And it's almost like I had the inability to just be in the present moment doing things that was right in front of me. I noticed that within the past few years, now that I've been medicated, I don't daydream anymore. And in a sense, I'm trying to allow myself to daydream again and use that imagination in a healthy way. But it's just, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's because I have the sufficient amount of dopamine I need to get through my day, but I don't need to just like get lost in my imagination in order to feel like existing is tolerable, you know? And I think in general, that's very helpful as an adult to feel like you could just be in the present moment and not have to constantly escape. So the last thing I wanted to mention is how the ADHD meds affect my eating. I'm not going to get too much into this because I do want to make a whole video about this topic because it is very complicated. But I do want to mention that ADHD meds can have a tendency to take away your appetite. ADHD meds help you manage your dopamine levels and helps your cognition and things like that. So if you are someone with ADHD, once all of those things are managed, it does pretty severely impact you when it comes to your relationship to food. And honestly, depending on who you are, your ways of existing. As an Asian American, food is very much so interlaced in my culture, my upbringing, and how I lived my life. And so when I started getting medicated for the ADHD and my relationship to food began to change, I feel like my whole relationship to myself and how I lived my life began to change as well. And that whole journey is very complicated, right? My relationship to food, I think, became a lot more healthy after I was medicated for the ADHD, because before that I struggled with eating disorders, specifically binge eating and orthorexia. And to be honest with you guys, I struggled with binge eating from 5th grade all the way through my 20s when I got diagnosed with the ADHD. It was pretty ingrained into my existence. And I didn't even realize I struggled with binge eating until I started getting medicated for the ADHD. And on certain days, I would go to binge eat, but then mentally, I didn't feel the need to. So there started to be a disconnect there. And that's when I started to realize, oh, there's an issue here. Like, why do I feel the need to habitually overeat past my fullness and things like that? And that's a whole journey that I feel like deserves its own video. But ADHD meds helped me realize that I had an issue with binge eating, and it helped me begin to outgrow my binge eating habits and begin to inherit more healthy habits around eating and food and all of that kind of stuff. And I don't think I would have ever be able to go through that journey of healing my relationship with food if it wasn't for ADHD meds, because my brain just wasn't wired to be able to deal with that on its own, you know? And that's something I'm always dealing with, even now, 4 years later, being consistently medicated for the ADHD, is how much of my life was shaped around my relationship to food. And now that that's been changed, how I approach life now and how I approach my relationship to food now. I realized that the only thing that drove me to eat was almost this hyper-focused obsession with food and building a whole ritual around food. So after that was taken away and food just was food to me and it was sustenance, I felt no need to eat anymore, which is not good, right? Like, you should have a healthy relationship to food where you eat because, one, it's something to sustain your body, but two, it simply feeling hungry is the only cue you need to go eat something, right? It shouldn't just be this really obsessed, hyper-focused relationship with food that drives you to go eat, and then it's almost like an all or nothing type of relationship. I don't know, it's just been really interesting, and that's definitely something to explore here for anyone out there who struggles with eating disorders and ADHD and things like that. I will say though, I've come to notice that since being medicated for the ADHD, even though the eating disorder has been healing, there's another aspect of disordered eating that's coming out in association to my autism that I'm beginning to learn about more and more the past few years, because there's a lot of things about food and like aversions to food, aversions to textures, smells, even the way that it looks that I didn't deal with before when food was my hyper focus and obsession and main source of dopamine. Now that I don't have that relationship and it's more balanced, I'm noticing that I'm a lot pickier, you know, just all these other things that kind of fall under the category of disordered eating rather than eating disorder. If that interests you guys, for those of you who might struggle with food and eating as well, please let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to make that video talking through it. If I do make it, I want to make it from a more neutral standpoint in terms of not demonizing issues with food and making people feel broken for it, but more so from the standpoint of this is our neurology and how that affects our relationship to food. That could have negative effects, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're inherently broken or wrong for it. It's just if it's unhealthy in any sort of way, you gotta find ways to make it healthy. You know, just again, great team. Great team. Let's neutralize that topic a little bit more, take the shame and guilt out of that sort of conversation. But yeah, I feel like that's kind of the end of today's video. I've talked through everything that came to mind. If this was helpful in any sort of way, please give this video a like. That helps me with the algorithm. That also helps other people be able to find my videos and my channel. And I'd be curious to hear from you guys, how many of you are diagnosed and getting medicated for your ADHD, and how much of a difference has that made in your life? Again, if you guys want to try out Magic Mind's matcha drinks, go click the link down below and you guys could get yourself a free 3 sample pack of Magic Mind. Just use the code ThoughtTrial at checkout. With that being said, take some time today to regulate yourselves. I will see you guys on the next one. Bye.